There is no one on that. There is no one on that. No? You can just remote.
Sure.
So, we can start now for this second part. So, just let me thank Sarah because she's also not academic, so it's very nice to have your academic talk and also with artists. So, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So my name is Fdili Alaoui, and I will be today presenting you some of my research, but also some of the literature on dance technology that led to this research. And this talk is called Dance-Led Research, Methods, Creations, and Critical Reflection. So I'll attempt to retrace the various approaches that have been followed in integrated technologies in dance up to today, and some of the premises to my own work. Bear with me, this is going to be lots of slides. I haven't organized things as I should have this morning, but anyways, I hope that the talk, you will see a little bit of the narrative behind this in the red thread. Yeah, so I'd like to start with this image just to kind of historically root where dance technology started from. And this is an image of the EAT events, or the 9 evenings events that happened in 1966, where I could say that it was the premises of the attempts in modern and contemporary arts to integrate technological design. You can see here Merskiniya with a dancer who's kind of mediated, whose dance is kind of mediated with a sensor that she's wearing, and here there are these engineers from Bell's lab who are creating interactive sound and feedback from the dance. So yeah. Dance technology is not new, it's not born today. With the MODINA project, it has had a long history, over 60 years of experimentations and knowledge that came from it. And I'm going to give you some of the examples that came out of that with some of the big names in modern and contemporary art who have been interested in exploring technologies for creative purposes. So, can you mute yourself and I unmute you? Yeah, perfect. So this is Biped by Merskiniya, and it was one of the first staged pieces where he integrated bodily representation, virtual bodily representations on stage, based on basically the movement of the dancers, and these threads that you see on top of them are supposed to be some kind of like interactive stage that reacting to the general choreography. Merskiniya was also an avid explorer of technology. Tricks. He's playing tricks on me. An avid explorer of technologies, and he's been one of the choreographers who's really kind of initiated and pioneered the development of tools for choreographic practice and choreographic writing. And some of you might know Lifeforms as this very quirky software who he used with his dancers to create dance sequences. And this is one of these. obviously that was done in the 90s, and it's a very specific vision of the body, but also, I mean, technological capabilities of, you know, animating biomechanically a body to serve certain dense aesthetics. But I think this was quite Cunninghamish in a way. Yeah.
Looks kind of balancing, I think.
Yeah. He really played with it a lot and had done a long-term collaboration with researchers from Simon Fraser University in Vancouver to develop the tool that has been maintained actually for 20 years afterwards, and even after his own death. For the little anecdote, his dancers really hated that software because it didn't have biomechanical constraints on the body, so it did create movements that were most of the time impossible to do, and Cunningham just kind of imposed his dancers to really try them on. So they were really, in a way, very resistant to technology. There's a piece by Jérôme Bell where one of the dancers of Cunningham kind of talks about the fear of using life forms during rehearsal. But anyways, yeah, William Forsythe is another one of these choreographers who really was interested not only in formalizing his choreographic knowledge, but using technology to do so. And this is one of the very first kind of CD-ROMs system to visualize this choreographic knowledge. And it was designed by Chris Ziegler, who's an artist who will be showing his work tomorrow here at Trafó. So we'll talk to him about it. But let me show you what they've done. This is quite simple, but I mean, it was complex for the time. This is 20 years old. But yeah, adding on top of video, basically visual knowledge that visualizes some of the choreographic principles of William Forsythe. And this was meant to be a transmission tool so that dancers would understand the under the scene and some of the structural principles of William Forsythe's work. Pretty cool. Yeah, I'm not going to list all the work that have been there, but Scott de la Junta is one of the main names in dance studies who's been investigating choreographic knowledge and trying to work within the Motion Bank project to make it more visible, more explicit, transferable, transmittable. So within Motion Bank, they have done a lot of, I would say, ethnographic work, really, because what they do is that they invite an artist into the studio and work for a long period of time, kind of understanding how these artists are creating their artwork, what are the principles and ways in which they can visualize that, make it visible to dancers and other artists. And so this is, for example, a piece by Deborah Hay that where they've done some motion capture and tried to trace a little bit the spatial patterns of the piece. Another work into which I participated as a PhD student now 15 years back, and actually this was also a collaboration with Chris Ziegler, so this was a long time ago. We worked together on this installation called Double Skin, Double Mind, and precisely Double Skin, Double Mind was really about making choreographic knowledge visible and transmissible. So what I've done as a PhD student is I spent a lot of time in the studio with the dance company, understanding it both from an embodied practice, so learning Double Skin, Double Mind, which is actually a workshop given by Emil Greco to train dancers on the they're the principles of the company and on the embodied knowledge that's developed in the company. And then try to kind of formalize what's happening in the body, both with words and with quantitative data, understanding the qualities of the movement. And then we designed this very complex installation called also Double Skin, Double Mind. And most of the visuals and the whole display, etc., was done by Chris Ziegler, and then the kind of artificial intelligence, back then we called it machine learning, was done by myself and my PhD advisor, Fdili Alaoui. So we had this camera that was recognizing the body and classifying whatever the dancers were doing into the different categories of movement qualities that the dance company has developed, and then giving feedback in real time to the dancers with movement, with the visuals, sound, text indications, etc., so that they kind of like build up their embodied knowledge of double skin, double mind. So we had videos of Emil Greco giving instructions, some additional kind of visuals on top of the video that were responding to the dancers' movement. The sound was also interactive and interactive with how people took on that vocabulary and how they basically embodied it. And then they could go on with different stages, learning it, embodying it, and even improvising with it as they learned it. So yeah, this is just to give you an example of the many, many projects that have been developed in contemporary modern dance in particular, around ideas of using technology to support understanding, learning, transmitting dance knowledge, making it visible, making it traceable, or supporting creative practices on stage. So that's why I call my work and this presentation kind of dance-led research. So starting from dance as a space of knowledge production and leading research from the way in which we understand what dance is about or what dance is producing. And this came a little bit in an analogy, and this is where I'm going back and forth between human-computer interaction and dance, came as an analogy to what Benford and colleague called performance-led research. In the wild, I specify it to my work, which has been only dealing with dance so far. So kind of looking at practice, looking at the theory, and looking at the kind of studies that can be done within that integration of dance and technology, and seeing how we can basically understand more dance and how we can understand more technology by meeting both, right? So for me, dance-led research, the question that I've been asking myself for 15 years now is, what can I learn, or what others can learn from integrating technologies in dance? What are these opportunities, the understandings, the tension, the political discourses that emerge from such an integration? And this kind of knowledge can be a knowledge about the body, can be a knowledge about history of dance, can be a knowledge about specific practices that are developed within dance, but can also be a knowledge about how we design technologies in that specific context, or technologies in general and how they intervene within creative practices. All right. I can take questions as we go, or I can just go on as a monologue and then finish and take questions. But if you have an urgent question, please stop me. So as I was preparing this talk, I thought, let me add some slides, just because I gave this talk so many times, I don't want to bore myself. So I added something from a very recent work that I've done with a PhD student of mine, or a previous PhD student of mine, where we talked about the different epistemic positions that we found in creativity-oriented HCI research. And it's really funny because two of them are the ones that you talked about. So in this work, specifically this is a theoretical paper, it's really asking the question about how we see creativity in the literature. Do we see it in terms of creative people, like who is creative, or creative action, like what is creative, or creative places, where is creativity happening, the body, the mind, etc. And so what we try to do is not to say that there is a better, really, definition of creativity. It's just to say that there are many underlying assumptions and definitions of creativity of all the work that exists in the literature that are not explicit, and that have or that vehiculate their own definitions, but also their own norms, biases, views of the world, basically agenda. And that we think it's important not to say that one is better than the other, but to say where we place the work with regards to these epistemic positions. Okay, so this is the unbearable table over here, and I would say that that David was somewhere between emergence and embodied action, right? And then you were definitely, Diogo, in the emergence one, the ideation activities and so on. And of course, I mean, so this is across work specifically in interaction, and we've reviewed much of the literature, and we've seen that most of it addresses creativity as one of these four epistemic positions. So the first one is this problem solving, and that really comes from kind of a very cognitive approach of creativity, seeing it as one specific case of problem solving, right? There's a set of heuristics that if you navigate that space well enough, you can find the right representations and the right solution for that problem. And it's parsable into rational steps. And I think AI kind of still is stuck in that model, which is kind of a 40 years old type of model. And that's why maybe, as I understood, you're trying to say that AI cannot be in that third row if it's still stuck within the first row. Basically, the AI is an optimization problem, and creativity, as you talked about it, is not, right? The emergence idea is a lot of what Diogo talked about, this idea of ideas emerging, divergence and convergence into, divergence to idea to maximum of solutions, and then convergence to choose or select one of these solutions. It's decomposable again into cognitive processes, and that's what we see a lot in design. Design trying to scienticize itself into the most kind of scientific of the artistic processes. And the problem with that, and obviously each one of these epistemology has specific challenges, but the challenge of that emergent model is that it still creates a dualism between the mind and the body. It's still seeing creative work as, an ideation issue that is basically cognitive and only cognitive. In the embodied epistemology, that's where we start to look at, creativity as irreducible, sometimes even undefinable. It's engaging with embodied knowledge, tacit knowledge, things we understand with the body. It's bridging the gap between body and environments, etc. But here, what we see, and some of the struggle that I talk about as well, is this tension between the general and the particular. What can we learn from that? Is everything subjective experiences? Are there things that one can understand beyond, the Fdili Sensi thing? That's some of the problems that we see with some aesthetics as well. And then the fourth thing is these expert activities, where we see basically that creativity is in the hands of few experts that have some kind of craft that they master, and that technology basically is just creating tools that can mediate that expert action. And again, this is also something that has been a lot developed in design, looking at, for example, graphic designers as people who have mastered specific type of actions, and that can be, that we can design tools customized to their expertise, etc. And for that, some of the challenges that we've seen was how that approach really emphasizes the voices of very few people as the experts who have that kind of knowledge or craft, and lack diversity and plurality of practices. So yeah, just keeping in mind these 4 epistemic positions. I personally worked across all of them, and then maybe at the moment trying to see if there is not a 5th one where I can place my work beyond basically all 4 epistemic positions. We'll see. So yeah, okay, moving on, some examples of work that we've done with expert choreographers. So studying their craft, looking at how they document their own practices. So here I'm giving you an idea of how messy the situation is in contemporary dance. For example, these are documents of scores from Nurse Cunningham and Teresa de Casmaker. I forgot who that top one is, but there's basically no commonalities between any of these documentation. They're all idiosyncratic. They all look at their practice from a very subjective and individual point of view. So we started looking at basically designing tools that have certain interactive power, yet that allow these experts to define their own choreographic objects, or what we call choreographic objects. So are they manipulating space? Are they manipulating qualities of movement? Are they manipulating relationships, etc., etc. So this is one of the attempts that's been designed by my former PhD students, Marianella Siolfi, and it's called Notation. It's an iPad system that allows a choreographer to design basically or to document a whole work based on the principle of a knot. And a knot can take any definition that they want to give it. Let's take a look. So yeah, they create a knot and then they give it an attribute. So say cap quality, the text, whatever. And then they can create timelines just by drawing a line and giving it an attribute timeline. And then they can add media to that. So imagine a video, etc. And they can add another timeline simply by giving it a knot of the genre timeline. And then they can play these timelines basically by playing play. Whatever media is on that timeline is going to be played one after the other. Of course, you can move them around, you can clone them, you can move one media from one timeline to another. So this basically allows you to kind of edit video. You can also create floor plans, which are called floor plans, and start by animating some of these trajectories that you create. And just moving a floor plan onto a trajectory makes it become an interactive trajectory. You can define speed, you can define duration, and the system kind of adapts to whatever you define and allow you to like visualize these things. So you can imagine each one of these trajectories being a dancer, for example. Here she changed the duration and then everything adapts to what she changed. You can clone things around and then they become interactive. Or you can undefine a certain trajectory. And there's this notion of portal to give details into something so that you're entering a page within the page. or you're distracting something. We're going back to the beginning. So yeah, this design was based on interviews we've done with choreographers, documents we've analyzed of how they basically document their own work, and kind of a categorization or a study that we've done about what is common to all of these people. And what is common to all of them is that they all manipulated objects, but that they define these objects differently. Some of them would focus on space, some of them would work on media editing, etc., etc. So we tried to design something that could be useful to all without imposing a specific language, without imposing a specific view or choreographic view. And did a bunch of studies with choreographers to which we gave this and asked them to create or to document a dance piece with it. And so how they appropriated it, or how they kind of like challenged the system. Here, for example, is a choreographer who's using it for real-time improvisation. It's not designed for that. He's taken me as a guinea pig, notating as we're dancing together. And we basically have, in a way, very interesting results about how these choreographers felt that this tool was open enough to accommodate different approaches of movement while still having some power to basically inspire them in their creative practice or documentation of creative practices. I'm not going to go in depth into this project, but this is kind of a similar approach, but for learning dance. Based on a study of how people basically learn dance movement. Let me just dig into one project in particular. So, work that I've done with Elisabeth Schwartz here about the archiving of Isadora Duncan, in collaboration also with two of my PhD students, Manon Vial and Tove Grunstad-Berg. So this is Elisabeth Schwartz. She's one of the specialists of Isadora Duncan's repertoire. Here she's dancing this Jérôme Bell piece called Isadora Duncan, where she's basically doing a portrait of Isadora Duncan through like 4 of the pieces of the repertoire. What you need to know is that even if Isadora Duncan is super important in the history of dance, etc., the repertoire itself is kind of being lost, and in most of the curriculum nowadays, dancers don't necessarily know of the repertoire, nor even the technique that Isadora Duncan has developed, which is a very specific technique. So Elisabeth Schwartz, who's now 73 or 74 years old, is one of the living kind of archive of that repertoire, at least in France, and she's transmitting that repertoire across the country, dancing it, and also she's been involved in a long-term research project with me around studying ways in which technology can provide tools to transmit that repertoire to younger generations. So let's take a look. it too dark? Yeah, maybe it's too dark, no? It is getting dark. I feel like everyone is gonna go napping.
It's too much, yeah? Is there another video or just... Oh,
Maybe that's the best we can do.
Maybe.
Yeah,
Want
thank
me to
you.
get this off?
Yeah. Yeah,
It's a bit too much, right? It's like the middle.
Okay. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think that
slightly
creates a
better.
bit of
Mhm.
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, this project has been ongoing for now 5 years, I think, with Exhibit, and we've had multiple collaborations. She's really eager to use, to transmit the knowledge, and here I can really talk about choreographic knowledge that she's gathered throughout her whole life, basically dedicated to the study of Isadora Duncan's heritage, embodied knowledge, technique, and so on. Also, it's really nice to see someone in her 70s performing and having that kind of physicality. It's kind of hopeful to know that dance maintains one in such great shape and creative mind and body. So yeah, we've been working with Elizabeth around this idea, and she's been teaching, and I've been taking her dance classes. My students have been taking her dance classes. Kind of again, having an ethnographic approach to that work, trying to understand it through our own body, but also to, write about it, talk about it, design in conversation, or what we call now in conversation with that knowledge. And using basically technology as a means to understand better what the dance encompasses and how we can basically represent it. So we did do this massive motion capture session with her dancing the repertoire, which was really interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because this motion capture, the whole suit was kind of exactly at the opposite of what Isadora Duncan is, which is fluidity, barely dressing, like with silk dresses, etc. And then all of a sudden you find yourself in a suit with the sensors all over. This is kind of a, interesting imposed constraints over her body, but we gathered some really good data that allowed us to do partially this work, but also some future work that maybe one day I'll talk about later. And the idea of the whole project around this living archive of Isadora Duncan was to try out different approaches to how we can represent this knowledge. And so Manu, who came from computer graphics, was interested in using it in more VR or augmented reality settings. So she started developing this ribbon idea with some very complex physical model behind it that would represent some of the core principles of Isadora Duncan, mainly fluidity of movement, the fact that, as you see here, one of the main principles of Isadora Duncan is that the initiation of the movement always starts from the plexus, the solar plexus, and the center in Isadora's work is not the usual kind of contemporary dance center, which is around the navel approximately, but is up here. And so we created this ribbon that has a human shape, but as you see, all of these limbs are kind of connected into what that solar plexus, which is more of a metaphor than an actual physical part of the body, is. So this has been some of these attempts that Manu has done. Or trial and error, I would say, until she arrived at a model that was satisfactory. And you can see sometimes there's 2 ribbons attached to the head, and all the artifacts or problems that come from that, and all these iterations, so version A, B, C, D are iterations of this model, going towards slightly more fluid representation. Then the idea was to integrate it into an augmented reality headset. So you could dance with the ribbon of Isadora Duncan, if that makes sense. Satisfied with the model physically as what it was able to achieve in terms of precision and fluidity. Obviously, all this work has been done with Elizabeth herself, kind of validating the model, really observing it from an analytical point of view, thinking about ideas of flow, succession of movement, center at the plexus, the solar plexus, and a lot of mathematical work goes into whatever physical model is underlying this, so to make it really kind of like structure the movement from the center to the extremities, for example. Manon also created this interface so that the dancers could basically control the model. With very simple controls, because these physical models are very heavy, but at least one could control, for example, the speed, pause it, walk around it, understand position, spatiality, etc. Yeah, and so we did a lot of user studies, many workshops. Most of these workshops were, all of these workshops were mediated by Elizabeth herself. They consisted in most cases in teaching the repertoire, or one dance of the repertoire, and then giving one of the interfaces, whether augmented reality or virtual reality, to the dancers, and then doing interviews, round discussions, drawing on body maps to understand the embodied experiences that they got from interacting with these avatars, etc., etc. And most of these studies led to kind of a qualitative understanding of the limitation of these models, but also what it enables in terms of understanding the dance style, reappropriating the dance style, dancing with an avatar, quote unquote, that allows that kind of understanding. Obviously, there are also limitations of, bringing this kind of devices into a studio. Most of these dancers have never used these kind of headsets. They are very heavy to manipulate. They impose a specific positioning of the head and so on and so forth. So we wrote about all of these things and we kind of reflected on the limitations but also the opportunities of this kind of work. There was more work by Tove here. I don't have the time to go into it, but she's done a lot of work around sonifying the qualities of Isadora Duncan and went, maybe I can just show the video. So she created these scarves that sonify basically the quality of fluidity and grounding in Isadora Duncan's work. And part of Tove's work was also about taking on herself the experience of learning about Isadora Duncan. So she's been part of a company that Elisabeth created with professional and amateur dancers who are touring now, learning some of the repertoire and kind of making it alive. And the second project that Tove did during her PhD was basically a physicalization of her own progression of learning Isadora Duncan. So she went through 8 months of learning 3 dance pieces with Elisabeth and the rest of the company, and she has worn a sensor during the dance classes where she basically captured her own movements as she was learning the repertoire from day 1 to the last day. And so she, after 8 months, she gathered a huge amount of data in this exact specific conditions that repeats every time she goes into class, and started playing with this data and trying to understand how to visualize this data. And so after a long process of design and physicalization, she created artifacts that are basically vases that represents her learning progression. So the first vase was basically the data from the first day she started learning Isadora Duncan. And this last vase is basically a physicalization of the last day she had learned and captured herself learning Isadora Duncan. And she's done this whole work with Elisabeth and myself, etc., reflecting on notions of grounding and how the shape of the vase reflect on how she progressed in her own embodied knowledge, talking about embodied knowledge and understanding of the principle of Isadora. I only have 15 minutes left, so I wanted to talk maybe about some of my own choreographic work as a choreographer and a researcher as well, but I feel like maybe we will talk about this later because we are going to talk about For Patricia. So maybe I will just say that I do create dance pieces that where I integrate technology and try to understand the specificity of how that operates and what limitations come out of that and what opportunities and tensions come out of that. For Patricia is one of these pieces. It's specifically using AI, but there are other pieces like radical choreographic objects here, who's a piece mediated by mobile phones where there's 4 to 6 dancers and the audience members are interacting with them through mobile phones. They receive instructions on their mobile phones on actions to do, things to do with the dancers, things to do among each other. And this piece has been touring a lot. It's been quite successful, and I think the reason for that is that the participation works really well because people get really engaged into that kind of logic of RCO. And at the beginning, they feel like they're entrapped in some kind of system that imposes on them to use their mobile phone, and then they emancipate themselves and start just enjoying the dance and being together. So a lot of my a lot of me performing this piece with the dancers was kind of observing how people reacted in this RCO situation, and the kind of patterns, social patterns emerged from it, and talking about it, writing about it basically. So yeah, they do receive like verbal instructions. Sometimes they receive an image of a dancer with the text, carry the dancer, for example here, carry ombre, porter ombre. And then everyone has to like collaborate to do that. Or they have to do some kind of actions. If they don't do it, there will be sound sent to their mobile phone that they can't stop, etc. It's quite a coercive piece that coerces people into participation. So at the beginning, people are like, what, why would you impose that on me? And then at the end, they like it. But yeah, for me, here's why it's interesting, is because it allows me to create kind of a social situation that I can't create otherwise, which is the situation of the dance piece, where these patterns, these social patterns, are not our everyday life patterns. In everyday life, we ignore each other. And then all of a sudden, there is a piece that's all about interacting with each other, with the dancers, you know, touching each other, kind of before COVID, touching each other. The piece goes into a realm of things that are kind of crazy, pre-COVID crazy. At some point it asks people, you know, at some point the dancers gather people and put them like a mountain of human on top of each other, and then ask them, kiss whoever you want, and then people start making out, and etc., etc. And so, yeah, so the research was kind of an observational study for me to understand, are people really going as far as we ask them to go, and how much do they allow these mobile phones to really be as intrusive, and how much do they emancipate themselves from it and become their own agents and creative agents within that situation. And so I kind of take a Foucauldian view of that in this paper, and talk about the situation as a bit of a constraining surveillance kind of situation, but that becomes or contradicts itself. Yeah, this is another example of work called Coda, where we developed with a colleague of mine, Jules François, this live coding environment called Coda, and an improvisational practice with each other. So what happens here is that as I'm dancing, I'm wearing two myosensors who are capturing my muscle activity and acceleration. Jules is actually improvising with the live coding. He's behind somewhere here on a computer, and he's basically creating in real time the relationship between my movements and sound. And so as he's coding, that relationship is changing, and as I'm dancing, that relationship is changing, and so there's an emergence of meaning if one wants to look at it from the perspective of improvisation in dance. There's an emergence of relationship and interaction where we're both collaborating into creating that meaning together and changing it over time. And so the performance always starts with a blank page with no interaction, no sound, nothing. And then as I start dancing, and as Jules adds lines of code, it complexifies into a very complicated relationship between movement and sound. And obviously this was very interesting, again, in terms of perception and action loop and what's added onto the improvisation. And we've been doing this practice for more than 2 years, just meeting on regular basis, improvising with each other. We had some principles with the improvisation. We would just not talk, so we would just start as dancing and live coding, and then see what emerges from the practice. Sometimes we would do that for an hour, sometimes 10 minutes would be enough, and so on. Okay, I will wrap up. Won't show more examples, but anyways, there are more. But what I wanted to say is, with regards to these kind of epistemic positions I talked about, I think that I'm somehow now placing myself in either of them. I don't know yet in what epistemic position I will position myself next. Maybe artistic research is trying to actually create some kind of new ways of generating knowledge that's beyond all of these. But I know that I'm not seeing creativity as a problem solving, or artistic processes as an optimization problem. So I do agree that AI is not going to replace that. I'm not even seeing it as an emergent, divergent cognitive process. I don't see artistic process the way I see brainstorming, for example, or ideation processes, although there are times where we're generating ideas, but that's not it. I don't see creativity, here is the obscure embodied process only. I really seek in my work to understand, document, articulate, translate the craft of making, and that's part of my academic journey since many years now, and I think I'm still maintaining that. And I try to see it less and less as this niche expertise, and mainly because of probably the neoliberal kind of narcissistic view of the artist holding knowledge. So I'm interested in exploring co-creation and adding voices into the creative process. And that's maybe something that I'm trying to get towards in the future, but not yet quite. So here's all the stuff that I'm not, but I didn't add what I am yet. So to be continued. Anyways, thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Do you want to light on, or do you want?
Yeah, sure. I feel like
No,
it's so dark.
You decide. Since you talked about the light. If we don't have half, or is it full, or
Half.
Not peaceful. Yay!
Yeah. If no questions, we can also continue.
No, I had some. But thank you so much for your talk. It was really great, and I see now some of the connections that you were making with the persons before. But there was something I was curious, because you said like one of your questions and doing the work was like, what can we learn with the use of technology in dance?
Yeah.
And sometimes there, I see the technology and like the insights for dance, that to use the technology not just as a tool, but to think what dance can be or what dance is to you. Like, can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the Isadora Duncan project, for example, is a really good I don't think that the work that we've done with Elisabeth is necessarily that we created an archive that's ready to be circulated, although the data that we captured, the models that we captured, we gave it all. It was funded by the National Center of Dance in Paris, and we gave all the data to CND. You know, they're archiving it somewhere. It's existing somewhere, at least from. I like the fact that there is data that is there, and that's captured and stored somewhere. We wrote about it. 75 pages of description of every single quality that's, you know, at play, and how the physical model is basically reproducing it, not reproducing it, what's at stake, what's the metaphor. So that knowledge is written somewhere in the archivist is taken care of, storing it for humanity's, I don't know what, knowledge maybe. But I think beyond that, what was really interesting for us, for both Elisabeth and for myself, and we talk about it a lot with Elisabeth, is that collaborative process and all these discussions that came from it, and all the students that learned the repertoire, and how when we're creating technology, we're learning from dance, and Elisabeth is learning from the design of the technology, and there's a circulation of knowledge within that same process. So basically technology becomes almost like not an end, but a means of conversing and of understanding. And definitely, I did not know necessarily enough of Isadora Duncan's repertoire, nor principles, etc. And I think that exactly that's where I'm saying that technology becomes a way in which we investigate certain dance principles or understanding of dance principles.
That's completely a good example, because I've seen so many representations of the body, like in augmented reality, and I really like the solution, the visual solution that you have, because it showed great fluidity. And with that example, I think it was really, you should be happy, because I think it was a very good example of fluidity of that body. So I could see that the technology was helping to see more of the body without the ego of the artist.
Definitely.
Because you see more into the almost the technique that is there without saying, oh, it's Isadora, let's just Isadora character, but looking more into the
to like the qualities and the principles. And I think part of it was also because we were very lucky, because Elisabeth was very engaged in the research. And at every stage of the design of that ribbon, she was constantly kind of like looking at it, analyzing it, using, you know, lab and movement analysis, using her own knowledge, etc. And then commenting, oh no, the hands here are not doing what it should be. The ribbon, I can't see the successive movement principle, for example. Maybe you didn't see it in the ribbon, but always movement is in successive, meaning it's like a wave starting.
That's what I like, because sometimes it just appears like
it's
points
not
of articulation, like of the body, and then
here there's a lot of work that was put in the mathematical, like kind of equation behind that ribbon, so that it represents very closely those kind of principles. And I think part of it was because Manon and Elisabeth were very closely working with one another. And Manon was she also has a background in dance, and she was dancing with Elisabeth, learning the repertoire herself, going back to the lab, etc. So there wasn't that kind of break where you see, you know, like a computer scientist just doing the work on their own in the way, and like giving the results to a dancer afterwards.
Just another one from has like, we find it interesting, like this neoliberal, I love it, like at the end, the neoliberal view of narcissistic view of the artist. But how do you feel it like it's like looking at non-dancers? It's like looking at how this technology goes, like looking, because always like I feel there is something there when choosing the cases, that we're gonna look for a big name in front.
Yeah, that's
or a
the
name
thing.
that is like, already very well known. So you're just not
Exactly.
looking for the college, it's like, oh, let's look at
Wayne
Zoran
McGregor.
Dijker, Groningen, Wayne McGregor,
No,
like,
absolutely.
you're looking at
And
the,
I could do another talk, a whole talk about that, I think, but dance tech specifically is reproducing, I would say, the flaws of both technology and dance.
yeah.
Meaning, and a latest paper by a colleague, Jessica Rajko, just came out talking about, you know, how dance tech is basically reproducing kind of oppressive models. And she's really, and that's true. I mean, let's just, if we take a look at the history of dance tech, it's mainly big, huge, not even
Yeah.
big, huge, massive names
Yeah.
of dance that are seen as the expert, who will have these huge, and I've done one with the Emil Greco project, huge European funding, so that, and we were probably like 5 or 6 researchers. There was Carla from linguistics, I was there, Frédéric was there was designers, Chris was a designer, there was the dancers of the company involved, etc. Huge research project just to investigate, you know, the qualities that Emil has invented. And it's like, it's great because that kind of knowledge is really important, but you know, the space has been built mainly for these kind of work. And we can look at Wayne McGregor, he's a great example for that. I mean, you know, Google Arts and Culture has dedicated 1 or 2 big, massive AI projects to his repertoire, etc. So we see, you know, yeah, we can see that there are 2 main ways in which it works in dance tech so far in the literature, in how it has been done. Either you have these massive big projects under the name of the genius big choreographer, and an army of researchers investigating their language or their choreographic approach. Or you have projects that are initiated by researchers, where they take dancers who are less famous, don't even name them, kind of create a bunch of software or systems or whatever based on collaborating with them, don't even name them, they're not even, you know, in the papers, etc., and they're basically being instrumented for the sake of creating research or software. And there's very little kind of knowledge of how to create fair collaboration for more people, more voices, more, yeah. So I think that this is an issue, and we've been somehow vocal about it, not to even mention that has been no space for any type of style of dance except for Western styles, and mostly ballet, contemporary, and modern dance. So a very like Western take on everything. One can talk about like a colonial vision of dance tech. So I think that the field has a lot to progress into in terms of vision, in terms of philosophy, in terms of ethics, etc. But we're starting to talk about it, so this is positive.
And then you have MODINA, right?
And then yeah, well, we're equal, right? Everyone's equal.
No, but I also thought that that sentence at the end was interesting, because I think there's something valuable about knowing what expertise you do carry. Right?
That is
So it's
true.
like not to nullify, I cannot pretend to know what you know. And just because you know something that I don't know does not mean that we should invalidate what you know. Because actually I would probably get a lot out of learning what you know. But at
Yeah.
the same time, I guess, it's like, oh, there's this expert, and then their way is the way that should be modeled after is,
Yeah. Or it gives legitimacy to whatever is created afterwards, I think, is having this name, this big name.
But I think maybe my thought would be like about people who are experts at a craft that are not known.
Yeah, exactly. Or other styles of dance,
Yes.
or groups of practices in other styles. I think that would be really interesting.
Because I remember when Carla was developing like the transmitted knowledge base for performing arts, we were saying like, how can people navigate this like library? And like at first, like I was saying like, how can you get out of the names? Because it's like if you don't know the name, you just go into search from the choreographer's name, and how to tag common attributes that you can discover something else. Like in the filtering that you're saying, like in the first talk about the filter of your name, and then you just have that, and you lose the discovery aspect of
Yeah.
things that interest you. And there's something really Colin really said about that it's interesting to think about. So I'm loving to see it again.
All right.
So thank
Time's
you,
up.
thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. I think now we move to the next, I would say, the second part of the seminars. It's more about artistic pieces that were shown and performed. So it's getting more, I would say, more informal now.
Yeah.
So my challenge here would be, so we have some trailers of the performance, so we can show the trailers, so just to people, and I invite the artists to talk about their work, what were the goals, and what was the process. So in a very short way, so we can, in the end, we can just be together and discuss. I know David prepared some nice questions for you guys.
Nice question.
So just let me try to share.
Yes, if Chris is available, yes, I start with Monica. So I had this idea of people like presenting a bit from the artist, like if Max, you want to start, or someone else, like because this idea now is like from some of you to talk a bit of the projects that you have
Yeah.
out here with MODINA.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't prepare a presentation or anything, but maybe just showing the beginning of
Yes,
the trailer.
So
It's right there.
It's right
Yeah,
there.
it's even suggested video. It's just,
It's
it knows.
like the algorithm is doing the work, who knows?
Don't need to discover the trailer. That should be video from
Yeah. Like to share a lot of you guys are invited to come from London.
So that, do you want me to play the video and after you talk about it?
Sure.
Sure, yeah.
Sziasztok, mi mesterséges intelligenciával foglalkozunk, és büszkén izgatottan mondani.
Sorry, YouTube stuff.
We all empathize there. We have to
They're behind schedule or we're behind schedule?
Yeah, they are there.
They are.
Behind. That's what they said, maybe 7, not earlier.
Okay. How do we begin?
We can start with what was your intention with this
Yeah.
project.
So yeah, like the original. Oh, hi, my name is Max. Nice to meet you for the people I don't know.
I'm Celia, nice to meet you.
And our buddy Louis is also part of the project too.
You can go, Louis. Yeah, also. Enjoy the conversation.
I mean, this is our third project that the three of us have worked on together, and I come from like dance and choreography, and they come from
Yes, digital interactive installation.
Yeah, more from the specific real-time field, interaction and
the starting point of this was how can we make a system where you could interact as an audience member and then watch back what you do. It was a bit more grand, this idea, like we were going to film like 30 minutes of people interacting, and then that was going to have this like crazy abstract visual representation. Afterwards, this was like a very original plan. What was important was that the movement generation and movement participation takes place in the dark, and that it is not forcing anyone to move in a particular aesthetic or technique, or that it is not about dance so much as it is about self-actualized movement.
yeah, but it was a big part of the project to push people to interact with playfulness, and thanks to feedback, to sound feedback, to light feedback, and it was a big interaction design question for us, how to push some people to go inside. And I think one of the themes of the project was the memories in general. It was inspiring for us, the idea of memories to be recorded, to be stored somewhere. With this idea of this space, we proposed, and each people just entering our store somewhere for a long time. I hope that in my iPad. And yeah.
There's some kind of persistency in the space, like so 5 square meter by 5 square meter, but we move each time of place in time, but the time is always projected back from the video projection after the wall, so like a connection of this place that it's a digital fictive place that stored each time each people can see.
Yeah, the idea of people can live there.
I mean, the system, for people that were not in it, when we did it here yesterday, there's a recording area which is demarcated with light fixtures, and by stepping into it, you trigger a recording, and all your movement produces sound and visual and light feedback. And then whenever you stop moving, when you step out, then it stops recording, and you're stored in a bank of all the movement that has ever existed in that time frame. And then you are matched with all the people that used to have been in this space before. So if you are the 500th recording, then you could be compared with someone that had stepped in with one of the very first recordings. An idea is to have this kind of digital and time-resistant connection between things that happened before and where they happened and when. And we made this initially in
February when we first showed it, at the beginning of this year, and it was 6 months between then and now that we showed it again. So there's technically a 6-month gap of time and place also between Tallinn to Düsseldorf to Budapest. So it's trying to say, okay, I contributed this movement, or I contributed or explored in this way, and I get matched or compared or seen with something that someone I don't know, and some place I don't know, and some time I don't know.
Will you be part of participative creation also, because like if there was no one inside no one never comes, there would be no match, nothing. Here you meet people that sometimes, like you said, 6 months ago, and you create the new data for future use so that you reappear. Us, we are very, we love to watch because it's very funny when we saw the brother of Celia that come past to see the work and to see him test or seeing weird testing to see if the pattern move, and we appear sometime with the buttons as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because we don't categorize what is a dance movement, what is a pedestrian movement in that space, or when does it blend from just exploring as a layperson to becoming something so choreographic performed by a professional dancer. There's no categorization of that. It's just movement in space with like a vector coordinate. So in that way, it kind of takes away this barrier, but then it really reveals also the personage of people's attitudes when they go into the space. Every time we see it happening and we see people participating, you really see the dancer go in and do something dancey, and then people being afraid to go in because, well, they're not dancers. I don't want to do something and embarrass myself when there's professional dancers in the room. But technically that's only dependent on your attitude, and like Louis said, the more different kinds of things people are wanting to contribute, then the larger the bank of different things is, and the larger the matching can be. And that yesterday I was watching and I thought, wow, I'd never seen that match happen before, or if there's not enough of something, then it matches you with something really different. Until then suddenly there's two movements, even in different times, that is a new match, that by contributing something new, it has a better chance of what it can connect with. And so it's, in a way, we designed the whole thing to be as pushing for the responsibility of the participant as possible, or the curiosity of the participant, which is a big ask. We know that because of how shy we can be. But I do think that we've seen it kind of in action now that we've been in 3 different places, and we have over 600 recordings now, 600 or something.
Yeah.
So we were looking 612 yesterday, or 512, 612. Yeah, 612. Yeah. Like you really do see the richness of the variety of things people do try eventually, even if initially people step in and they just walk around not sure, and that counts as recording too, But then the more people go in, the more the things it can become. So I do think that the longer this happens and the larger this data bank, I'll put in quotes, it is a data bank, but I think it's much more human than just data, because it's asking us to react to it. I think it's quite enriching yesterday to see.
And the other thing that you never know which match is done, because you can't really understand, I think, all the eye match, the thing, almost also because we let also not only the movement, but the quality, the scores of the detections, like that, make everything much more blurry, because sometimes like just an undetected arm will match much more with someone like this. It's like there's this randomness of this that makes it not a pure system that really makes you match with someone. It's much more blurry. I don't know sometimes why we get this. I think
No, we have quite often there's some instability. Like the base of it is that the body has to be recognized by the camera, and then it says, okay, it's human. We'll take that data and we'll put it into the system. If it doesn't do that, or if it loses track of a body part, it goes somewhere else. So sometimes there's a lack of fidelity of the data going into the system, but we accepted that as part of the kind of incongruency of memory as well, of pattern recognition. Maybe we remember things wrong, or we do things and we think, okay, I remember that, but I don't, how is it? You have a memory one time and you think, why am I thinking about this when right now I'm here doing this? Right? So we kind of accepted this technical limitation in our project, or I think it can be on an optimization level solved, but within the time frame we had and with our resources, this is what we got. But it ends up then creating slightly strange matching, because what we see and what we think should match doesn't always occur, and we get matches where we're like, why am I matched to someone lying down when I was running in a circle for 10 seconds?
But it breaks also the predictability, and it makes like a partnership also to play to find. It will not be like just straightforward, I do this, I will come on this. No, you never know. It's like a second part, like someone try to play, to trick him, to just not making the full. At the beginning, people, yes, the first time they dance, but if people stay a long time, you finish too much now to try to treat the system, or to play around and to see that he can't find himself when he do the same dance.
We create a system, and since the beginning it grows, and we see the result, and it creates curiosity for us to discover what happened and what can people do. And yes, it's interesting for us, because I hope for people that we can too, because it can be fun to. It's a motivation to go inside and to try to find another people, or to find yourself, and to try to understand how it works in general.
I think if I had one thing to kind of question for how it would develop, or how it left me wondering, is like, in every place we've been, there's always the human shyness of like, this is technically almost performing in front of strangers anyway, especially if there's people around. So it's like human shyness of going in and testing something, and if it doesn't react in a way that is, I'm going to use this word carefully, rewarding, or rewarding your curiosity, then it's easy for people to step in once, try something, okay, is it not working? Sometimes it's not working. Or it's working, but I don't get it. So, okay, then I step out, and then I put on my jacket, and I'll leave. And so, like, every place we've been to that has happened, there are people that simply never cross the barrier of wanting to go in. They come in and watch, and then they go out. So, my concern was kind of, well, what sort of feedback is necessary for people who want to keep testing? It's not, you don't pressure people, but that it doesn't have this, that there's complexity in exploring it, but even in its simple initial approach, there's not this, how do you say, unrecognizability. I don't understand what's happening, so I don't want to.
Well, the block was for this, but maybe I guess to totally hide people. It will be less interesting for the other.
I don't mean that I'm unrecognizable, but the system. I don't recognize the system. I don't understand the system.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one of my concerns now. Afterwards, it's like, oh, there's people. It's a shame because someone goes in, tests something, and then they bored. Maybe they're people that get bored very quickly. So that's just a personal part of that. But it's like, maybe isn't there a way that it keeps people wanting to keep curious? People who come from tech background or dance background, they want to break the system. But what if it's people that are not in either of those camps?
Yes, yes. As we see in particular each time kind of framework of dance and technology, so to say, with a wide audience, if all they react. But I think it will be much more the opposite. It will be much more messy than like 10 people all the time inside.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I don't know if you guys have any questions. I mean, some of we've already spoken a lot about different work we do with each other.
If you can, or even if you want like on break, because now this first part we was thinking like you presented it like you did, it was amazing. You're not talking too much, but it was amazing. And we have like the other project presenting a bit, also their project and how they want to present it. And maybe then we can have like a small break and we can talk in the breaks with the guys more excited with some questions, and then we join the questions, because maybe that can generate already like a good talk and connections between your project and the other project. Maybe there's something there in common. What do you think? But if there's like more questions till now, someone who still wants to do it now, we can already jump to it. No? So, thank you so much. We'll come back soon to this again. Thank you so much for your presentation. Then we have now, I think it has to be you guys. Because this is the drawing with.
It's interaction.
It's light interaction.
And then take this up. Yeah, it goes like, it goes from up, you're looking up, and then it goes back here, and then, you know, your feet are up there, are down there, and then there's the common diagonal going like. When we started this project with John, we thought, what about if we play with these choreographic structures, but this time we perform it in 2024, meaning we bring it into a world that's highly mediated with technology, where everyone's talking about AI, etc. Open, continue your circle, cut, open, and then throw, look at it, it's going down, kick it. What if we use these technologies creatively in order to regenerate ways in which we can compose with music and choreographic structure? We're going to take, inspiration from Trisha Brown, the Judson Church, and we're going to develop some AI that will instruct us on how to dance on stage. It's a nice rhythm. But it has so many details. I don't think we got it yet. It could work for this, but we'll have to be more subtle with what we're doing.
We train it on you and Bartek's mocap data from yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
That's the model. We feed it the mocap data from the Trisha Brown archive.
As this scenario.
And it outputs score instructions for the music and the choreography.
From Saran Bartek.
So
Controlled by Trisha.
So you're all welcome for Patricia. Please to come with us. Stay here with you all.
So we have a third as well.
All welcome.
Already flew back. But this is Leo. He joined us pretty early on, really.
Yeah.
I mean, did attended at least half of the residency and progressed with us. So we, the three of us are connected because Sarah's the professor and the postdoc, and I was the PhD student. But more than that, yeah, we conveniently work between human-computer interaction, computer science, and artistic practice, and combine them. I've done that for quite a bit of time in various projects independently. So, yeah, what did you say about this project? Sarah said to me one day, hey, we're going to put this call out, and wouldn't it be interesting for us to apply? Sarah had the original sort of core idea of doing something with archival video of Trisha Brown material, or at least the idea of archival material that would sort of guide a live score that we would perform to.
Yeah, that was like a very initial. We
Very
really
initial.
had no idea how it would look like.
So we wrote a proposal down and then spent the next couple months trying to figure out how to actually do that.
Yeah.
Basically.
Year maybe.
Or a year, yeah. So yeah, we did the residency for 2 months, premiered the piece, and then because the three of us were all in Paris at the time, we are no longer. Now I'm in Canada, she's in London, and that's still there. But over the summer, because we were all in one place and still working together, we did another smaller residency on our own to continue to kind of like, once we finished with the residency, I think it was important to, there was enough there that we knew that we kind of wanted to finish, work out. We even added a section to the piece that we knew we wanted to do. So we had a little midsummer boot camp that was really nice to really, I think, kind of finish off the piece properly and also keep it fresh enough. So when we came to do these showcase shows, it wasn't completely foreign to us.
We had a little bit of a last minute change. Bartek was not able to perform during the tour, so we had to change dancer last minute. But luckily, given that we're OCD academics, we had documented everything, recorded everything, wrote about everything. So we could just kind of send a big file to Pauline, who took on the role, which was, she was kind of a bit struck by the amount of detail of documentation. She's like, I can tell you guys are academics because this amount of detail is kind of bizarre. But it served its purpose because she was able to learn a big chunk of the choreography on her own before she arrived to Tallinn and danced it for the first time and kind of like got into it, kind of saved the tour.
Yeah, kind of did an amazing job.
Danced it after two days of rehearsing with everyone. Yeah, what else can we say? We really, most of the technology has been developed by, or all of it actually, by John and Leo. But we worked together mostly on kind of the principles and the idea, the core idea of the piece being that there is some kind of AI system, and AI seen in a large sense that would be structuring what we do on stage and instructing us on what we do on stage based on a vocabulary that we pre-composed. So John pre-composed sections of the music and I pre-choreographed sections of the dance, and then everything gets shuffled around during the performance according to that AI. And basically what we're doing is that for each performance we take a new video of Trisha Brown's archive, and that was given to us by the Trisha Brown Dance Company. They gave us basically 5 different
Yeah, about that,
performances or something
Yeah.
like that. So-
Rehearsals.
Rehearsals,
Yeah.
performances, which is what you see at the beginning. So for example, what Yuri was presenting was the video that we used for Trafó. And so, so what we perform in Dance House is different from what we perform in Trafó because the original Trisha Brown data is different. And so this AI or this system kind of learns from that, and we give it also my material, my choreographic material, and makes correspondences between the two, and reshuffles Sarah according to Trisha, basically, big. Except that, of course, there's a bunch of heuristics that were added because if we let Trisha decide everything, sometimes it gets boring. It goes do A. So we kind of gave the AI a little bit of additional rules.
Right, yeah.
Additional, yeah. So, and it's really interesting because we talked about it, because MODINA asked us to talk about it every time we perform it, and you know, we haven't really analyzed the data yet. We don't really know what the paper that we will be writing about the performance will be about, but at this stage we have talked about it so much that I'm starting to get an idea about what the research is going to be.
We're just ready
about.
to write the paper.
We're ready
Yeah.
to write the paper. I'm ready to just write it and stop talking about it, right? And I think the core really of what we discovered through this process, and correct me if I'm wrong, is about how much we've negotiated. You know, and you said it last time in Dance House, and I really like that, stayed with me. You said we kept AI at a short leash. And I think that's really what we learned here is that we are trying to stay true to the core principle of the system giving us instructions while not giving up our agency as makers and trying to still make it do what we want it to do. Right? So we're trying to kind of control it at the same time as we want it to control us. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, that's what we're going to be writing about, probably, as I foresee.
I'm just asking I to download the thing, right? So maybe I was just asking to download from your phone.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What else to say? Maybe we can talk about how we kind of choreographed and composed together, which was
Yeah.
you know,
Well,
yeah.
yeah, and also too, just about the paper, the future paper, the way we sort of approached the research angle of it is this, what is the proper term? It's a collective autoethnography
Yeah.
or something like that, where each of us that were involved, especially during the residency, which is kind of the primary focus. You know, we kept you know, our own personal like journals and you know, generated a ton of material, be it you know, our own personal journals, photos, video, notes, scraps of paper, you name it, and that is sort of the source that we can then go back and kind of retrace our steps. And like Sarah was saying in her talk about, you know, how do we generate knowledge out of our practice, is kind of what we're trying to do with this. And so in preparation for how we structure it, we had what, like 6 discrete steps of like that we walked through in the process. That started with like even before the residency, there was this sort of pre-production phase where I, for the music, was playing around with some compositional ideas. I think you were in the studio doing similar things, just sort of blank sheet of paper, trying things out. You were trying like some old sort of banked choreography ideas that you had. And then also just sort of tackling, okay, how will we design this AI process? I guess step 1 was when you're actually in residence together. That was an interesting process of starting separately. I composed a bunch of music, you created a bunch of choreography, and then finally, we had the day we were in the studio together. It's like, well, I did this, okay, how do we put it all together? And yeah, figuring out like certain parts worked beautifully together, no notes, and then others just completely didn't work, and then you know, figuring out the parts to keep, the parts to adapt, what things are flexible to be adapted, and what are the non-negotiables. And I think that was sort of the step 2, sort of the exploratory creation of the piece. Step 3 was our technical mentor partners came, which was the Morevi crew from Dusseldorf, Ben and Chris, yeah. And we spent a week of workshop, or 3 or 4 days of workshop, doing motion capture, working on various avatar visualizations, and with a lot of success, with a lot of failure, and built something that was going to be in our piece, and then a couple days later took the entire piece out and decided that didn't work, and continued. And I think that's an important, and maybe less to do specifically with the MODINA context of dance in AI, but just in terms of like a process base of artistic creation. The amount of material that you throw away can be astounding. And I think we needed to do every single part of that to get to sort of where we were with a lot of the stuff that we were using with capturing motion, even though we ended up not using the system that we were using, but that helped us sort of refine our part of the process of taking these old archival videos and turning them into actually usable motion data that sort of feeds our system. What 4 was the panic, okay, now we have like 2 weeks to actually finish this and put on a show.
Yeah.
We did that, and then 5 and 6 was, we did the show, and then 6 is maybe everything after the summer residence.
There was also a turning point where we realized that Dicey, that system that we're using now, was not designed the way that we've imagined to use it. So we had to like kind of turn it upside down, or like redesign our data accordingly, basically.
Right.
We went back and forth.
Yeah.
So there has been some like interesting turn of events within that design process, where all of a sudden we're like, oh, now we understand how that system actually works, and it's not at all like what we wanted to do. So what are we doing? Went back and forth to talking to whoever made the system, who's a colleague of mine in IRCAM, who then understood the constraints of what we want to do, gave us kind of a solution. We walked around that kind of solution. So there was these moments of panic, I think, where we were like, should we just throw it away and just use a shuffler, basically a dice?
Or write a Python script.
Or or just write a Python script that will
We're basically using, what is the proper term for Dicey? It's for like audio accompaniment. So you feed it like one stream of audio, and then feed it a second one, and it will chop it up and create new audio with it. And we were doing that on a totally different time scale and kind of completely different process, and sort of we're making it work, and then at times not, and then that was a point that I guess I just blocked out of memory. That was definitely one of the important steps, was getting to the point where it's like, it actually just does not work at all.
That way.
We should probably throw it out, but we didn't, but we kind of changed it. And it's something actually I worked over the summer to actually bring it to a point where now, for these shows, it actually fully works. And it was something that I think we thought would be easy, and took like a summer for. So.
Yeah. It's also, I mean, and that's something interesting, I think, for you to write about specifically, is all of these discussions where we went back and forth between, should we ditch it? At the end of the day, what matters is whatever people see on stage. We can fake it, nobody will know. Should we fake it? But no, the core of the piece is about actually using a system that challenges us on stage. So if we ditch it, then we're not true to the core of the piece. So there was all of these back and forth kind of, where technology becomes something that brings in anxiety and brings in feelings and brings in, right, affects and emotions. And it's not just about, yeah, it's just supporting our practices. Like, we were trying to be true to some sort of idea of it. And at the end, I think we, by deciding to make it work, and by you kind of like putting your summer into it, luckily we arrived at a moment where we feel at peace with it. So that's good. We feel that we're not faking it on stage. We're not faking it on stage, but we're controlling it enough that it's actually giving us something interesting, while still having that element of surprise being, you know, the core of the piece. So yeah, I think maybe there's a lot to be said about the back and forth.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. It makes me think, Yuri, of what we were talking about just when you saw us setting up. And so, for those that have seen our piece, you know, we have like some visuals that have like some cryptic graphical representations of the steps that are projected on the stage behind us, on the wall behind us. But then we also have a TV screen that's off to the side that we're looking at that has the instructions for us in plain text. So it's either like numbers or letters or codes that tell us what to do. And so Yuri was saying, like, it's actually, the audience is really interested in what's happening on that TV screen.
True.
And you should, he actually asked us just to write like a little paragraph of like, can you just explain what actually that is and how this system is working, because people want to know. And you know, I think we didn't necessarily speak internally too much about it when we were creating the piece about, you know, I think we always had this idea of doing a piece that isn't necessarily, you know, a dance technology piece, that if you knew nothing about it, you could just come see us perform and you see two dancers and two musicians on stage doing what looks like a fairly conventional piece. But if you want to listen about, you know, how it's all put together, it's like, oh, we have, you know, AI is showing us blah, 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 blah. And I don't know that we necessarily talked too much about how much we're wanting to really push that as, you know, this is a piece made with AI. And we have, you know, talking about this work or previous works of ours or stuff that we have worked on, as this idea of AI being just sort of like a supporting layer and not like the main feature, not putting robots in the middle of the stage, but it's just, you know, something that we're using.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I have a final like, and so we decided to do this, because I think even like yesterday, like, it would be really interesting to like address that TV screen a little bit more. So it's somewhere in between, yeah, making everything like very transparent and showing exactly like, you know, this is built with AI, this is how it's built with AI,
Yeah.
versus, you know, like something more conceptual in the background that
Yeah.
don't need to be concerned about now.
Yeah, and I think in postmodernism they were also like having very complex processes, but not necessarily displaying it on them on stage. But for the interested audience members, they could dig and know, you know, there is, you know, this one is like throwing dice and then reshuffling, this other one. I mean, if you look at Trisha's pieces like set and reset, etc., there's some very complex back and forth between go reverse, and group dynamics and so on. But at the end of the day, I think for us, kind of like, because the whole piece is also an homage to that history, for us, we were not trying to hide completely that we're working with AI, because there's still that monitor, but we're trying to not necessarily make it the central stage, and trying to make the piece also just an aesthetic experience, really, for the audience members, so they can enjoy. I mean, it's nice to have like 2 live musicians and 2 dancers, and just, you know, watch it for what it is, as movement for music for its own sake. So that's also a possibility, but we don't hide it necessarily, because we talk about it.
Right, yeah.
At the beginning, we talk about it all the time. So I think, yeah, something of that kind of position is where we're at.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
There we go.
Thank you.
a small break. You can eat and drink something and resume in 10 minutes.